Welcome to Flowcast. I'm Sister Beth Murphy. The Dominican Youth Movement, USA, has its origins in the very successful high school preaching conference that was begun in 1999 by Adrian Dominican sister Pat Brady. 4 years later, the college preaching conference launched. In 2006, the first chapter of the Dominican Young Adult Movement was formed. And then in 2015, that and several other Dominican youth and young adult programs were coordinated together under the auspices of Dominican Youth Movement USA. Now the program has three main focuses: the high school preaching conference, the college preaching conference, and the Dominican Youth Movement. These programs bring together young people from the ages of 18 to 35 for immersion into Dominican life and spirituality, forming young people who are prepared to preach the gospel from the pulpit of their lives. Here to talk with me today about the promise and challenge of growing the movement in the United States is Adrian Dominican sister Katherine Frazier, who is the Executive Director of Dominican Youth Movement USA. Welcome, Katherine.
Thank you, Sister Beth. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's good to see you again. I think we were last together in October for �𝐴𝐽𝐿 in St. Louis, weren't we?
Yeah, I think that's the last time we've seen each other in
Yeah.
person.
Well, I'm glad you could say yes to this invitation. Let's start by kind of putting parameters around the category. What do we mean exactly when we say Dominican Youth Movement?
So, Dominican Youth Movement USA we're our own nonprofit organization, and it was basically founded by a small group of people who had been involved in Dominican young adult chapters, who had been involved with the high school's preaching conference and the college preaching in action conference. And they wanted to ensure that these programs that they really loved would be able to continue for and be sustainable into the future. So the hope of our Dominican Youth Movement USA is really that the question of like, how can we help our young adults, our young people, our youth in this country to really catch fire with the Dominican Charism? How can we help them to learn how to preach and to follow the example of our saints Dominic and Katherine of Siena? And how can they bring that love of the gospel and sharing the message of Jesus with their communities?
Hmm. And how long have you been Executive Director?
I began this role in August 2022, so it's been almost 4 years.
And you were deeply engaged with the project before you became Executive Director. Can you tell us a little bit about what you were doing before then?
So, I guess the best way to say it is that I think that the high school's preaching conference, I like to say it's part of my vocation story.
Mm.
So, when I was the very first time I visited Adrian, Michigan to visit the sisters was the week before the high school's preaching conference. And I was set up with an opportunity to talk with Sister Mary Sower, who was running the conference at that time. And because she was in the midst of getting ready for the conference, I met her in our information office support system office at the Mother House. And she's like, "Hey, do you want to learn how to use a spiraling machine?" And I'm like, "Sure." So here I was as a discerner, first time meeting Adrian Dominican sisters, and I was putting together booklets for the high school's preaching conference. So I like to say it was inevitable that I would end up involved in this conference.
It sounds like it. I
And
did
I
not know
have
that
been,
story. That's great.
and I've been involved with the high school's conference and the college conference on and off since entering the community.
Mhm.
So doing a lot to volunteer and make sure that the event is successful. I've also run some workshops. So in the past, we've had a day of preaching through the arts. And I really enjoy doing a session where I talk to these high school students or college students, and I'm like, okay, so we're going to get out some acrylic paints and some pastels, some paper, and we're going to just go through like how art can be a way of prayer, do a little bit of color theory and ways that we can incorporate how to make our art better, and then put on some music and just have a very chill hour or so of just creating art.
Mm-hmm.
So there's lots of ways that I've been involved over the years.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you're right. It's kind of in your DNA, I guess, your Dominican DNA to do this. I myself used to show up at those conferences early and talk about my experiences in Iraq. I don't know, early on I was doing that. And after a few years, they needed to get somebody younger than I was. So I moved along, but I always found those conferences just full of so much life and energy. And another neat thing about it was that it was bringing students together from all of the Dominican high schools in the United States, including Puerto Rico. And it gave the young people such a broad experience of what Dominican family looked like and could look like, you know. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I can you tell some stories of some of the young people who have gone through the program and who are still in one way or another actively involved with the Dominican Youth Movement, or passing along the values that they learned to other people through their careers now?
Yeah. I actually, what comes to mind is that I had an encounter only at the beginning of January. So I was at the 𝐎𝐧𝐞 conference in Columbus, Ohio, and I was at a booth with all these other congregations of Dominican sisters. And there's thousands and thousands of people in this exhibitors hall. And all of a sudden, I just hear somebody shouting out, "Sister Katherine!" And it was these two students who had gone to Dominican high school in Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin. And they were just so excited to connect. And they're like, "We need to get our picture." And then they brought another guy who was also part of that group at the high school preaching conference. And he had his high school preaching conference t shirt with him.
Mm.
And he specifically brought that t-shirt with him so that we could get a picture of us with his t-shirt. And I was just struck by how amazing it was that, I mean, this is like 3, 4 years later, he was still carrying around this t-shirt. I mean, I think he brought it to work out in, but more power to him. Like, it was spreading the news of this
Sure, and
conference.
it still made an impact on him. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that the other thing that I really witness time and again is I'm always really excited when I hear stories about how these different students have brought what they learned at the conference into leadership roles in their high schools. So,
Mhm.
and I would say that's also true of the college conference as well.
Mhm.
Um, for the high school conference, there's a lot of times these students go back and they form like campus ministry leadership teams in their high schools. So they're doing a lot of work with doing reflections with the communities. They're helping to plan prayer services. They might be doing prayer over the PA every morning. So they're really working to put all these skills that they were introduced to at the conference into practice in their home communities. And I think that's also true to some extent with the college conferences. They don't, the colleges don't necessarily have like a preaching team in the way that our high schools do. Um, but they also will have, I've also heard stories about how they are putting into practice what they have learned to be on a leadership stage on their high school, on their colleges, and then their communities. So I'm thinking about some of the students that I've known from Ohio Dominican, for instance, and which is in Columbus, and how they've been really taken what they've learned at the College Preaching in Action Conference and come back and really been leaders in their Salt and Light ministry. Um, and it's been really exciting to connect with them a couple of times after they've attended the conference to see what they've been accomplishing in their home community. So that's always really exciting to see.
That's as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about how the formation that these young people are receiving, they're sharing when they go back to their high schools, and they're carrying into their own adulthood. So maybe we could talk for a minute about what's at the core of the formation that Dominican Youth Movement is providing through the programs that you do.
So I'd say that what some of our goals for what we really want students to walk away with, both our high school students and our college students, um, we've really had a focus over the last 4 years or so of really incorporating more leadership training into the actual conferences. So some basics, um, formation on how to be able to lead a small group, for instance, or how to take what we have to be like an authentic leader in our communities. I would say that another really big focus that we've really decided to take as in these conferences as an organization is to really ensure that everybody has some formation in putting together a preaching. And when I say that, I mean, I'm not expecting these people to necessarily get in a pulpit and preach in front of a gathered assembly in a church. What I think is more important is how are they taking those skills of preaching and doing it in a way that makes sense within the context of their school communities. So that might be giving a reflection at a prayer service or before a mass, an all school mass. It might be, as I said, how do you take those preaching skills and use it on a retreat? Um, so a lot of these colleges and universities and high schools all have like something in the Kairos model of retreats. And so there's talks that are given by peers at these retreats, and that's something that they can get some formation in how to do well. And I would say that another thing that is really um, important in our formation is how are we forming our students to have a heart for the needs of our world today? So, how are they learning how to be aware of the social issues that are around us at this time and how they can make a contribution and make a difference? And that's really important for our young people and our youth because so often it's easy to say, well, what am I supposed to be able to do with this? Like, I'm only a teenager or I'm only a young adult. Like, what is it that I really can do? So to give them direction of like, yes, there are real needs in our world, and there are ways that you can make a difference and have a contribution.
Yeah, that sounds like a wonderful plan. And woven through all of that, I'm sure, are the pillars of the order: prayer, study,
Yeah.
preaching, and common life. Um, as I'm listening to you talk, I'm thinking about the Dominican Veritas Ministries, the public juridic person that has been formed to receive our high schools. And forgive me because I'm struggling to remember. Have any of the Adrian high schools gone into that program yet?
So the Adrian Dominican Sisters have only we're only sponsoring one high school as well as one elementary school, and both of those schools are now part of Dominican Veritas Ministries.
Okay, right. And our we have our three high schools,
Yes.
and as of now, we are not officially members of DVM. That is to come. That will come.
Mhm.
Um, but we are engaged with DVM because of the opportunity that it offers for the teachers in our schools and the administrators of our schools to grow both their understanding and their implementation of formation in the schools along the Dominican model. And I'm quite impressed by, what I'm seeing through DVM. And I'm just wondering, do you have any interaction with that group at all?
Yes. I
So
have quite a bit of interaction with the
let's talk about that.
Dominican
I'd love
Very
to know. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah. I think that it's been how can we support one another in our ministries, knowing that we do have a fair bit of overlap
Mhm.
and in the schools that we are serving. So obviously, we serve more than only DVM schools, but we are definitely working with those DVM schools.
Mhm.
And I think another really important aspect of that, so you mentioned at the beginning that the High School Preaching Conference was begun by Sister Pat Brady. And Sister Pat also began something known as DAS, the Dominican Association of Secondary Schools, which has been enfolded into Dominican Veritas Ministries.
Mhm.
And the reason that Sister Pat was really passionate about all of this was she was really motivated by the question, how can we ensure that the Dominican Charism is alive and vibrant in our sponsored institutions when she was seeing way back in 1999 that there were fewer sisters that were in these schools.
Mhm.
And I know that today there's even fewer. I know that I was at Regina Dominican High School, which was sponsored by the Adrian Dominican Sisters and is now part of DVM. And I was there for 3 years. And when I overlapped with one sister for the first half of my first year, and then after that, I was the only sister in the school.
Mhm.
And then when I left, there was no one else. So I was the last sister in my community to serve in our high school. And so I think it's a really pressing question, even more so now than then, of how we can ensure that the charism is alive in these schools, even as our presence is not what it used to be.
Mhm.
And so I know that, like, I will go to like DVM. They have like talks online every so often, and I try to make them when I can. I definitely, I've had like meetings with their executive director. I know um, their director of formation pretty well because of his former role in the high schools and his participation in the conference. And there's a lot of really good work that they're doing, and I know they will promote the conference as well to their high schools.
Mhm.
So we try to find ways to collaborate whenever we can. But we definitely have, there is, there's a seed there of common origin between the two of us through Sister Pat.
I'm so glad that you brought that up because Sister Pat is no longer with us, but
Yeah.
she was a force to be reckoned with 26 years ago. And I
She was a
am
force
quite
to be
familiar.
reckoned with when I first met her when I was a candidate.
Yeah, yeah. She had so much energy and life in her. And look what has come as a result of her hard work. And to be truthful, not only her work, there were many sisters. Our sister Elise Ramirez was on the ground with Sister Pat doing that work and helping to shape what we now think of as, oh yeah, the Dominican High School Preaching Conference. Everybody knows about that. That's, a thing we all do. And, when it wasn't so obvious that that was going to be a successful program, other people, Pat was working with a lot of sisters from many different communities to make it happen. And it's the same thing with DAS, right? The Association of Secondary Schools, which you're right, was a precursor to this, what we call a public juridic person. It's an organization that holds the Dominican Charism for the high schools and elementary schools in some case that are a part of it. And um, I haven't really participated in any of the DVM materials yet, but I get their newsletters, and I'm really impressed with the way this group of mostly lay men and women who are fully imbued with the fire of Saint Dominic are running that program. You
Very
know,
much. They
yeah.
definitely have a heart for the Dominican Charism.
hmm how does that play out in your own life personally? What fuels your energy for it, Catherine? How do you keep going?
For doing this particular ministry,
Yeah.
I think that what fuels me the most is really when I see students who are excited about their faith lives. There's something very energizing to me about coming out of the conferences. I mean, granted, I'm going to sleep for a day when they finish, but there is a sense of I get really excited when I see how much they take it on for themselves. Um, Before I entered, I was in campus ministry at a university, and I always come back to that as what I found most fulfilling in campus ministry are the things that I find most fulfilling in this current position. Um, in the sense of really seeing the students being excited, really getting to see all of their silliness and how, but also how they start dreaming of ways that they can put what they've learned at the conferences into practice. So we have at the end of our conference, we have a closing liturgy, and this is for both the high schools conference and the preaching in action conference. And at the closing liturgy, our schools will come forward and they will say what is their action plan. So how are they taking what they learned at the conference and putting it into practice at their home institutions. So it can be I've heard everything from start a community garden to finding ways to be keep in touch with the sisters that founded that school. Sometimes it's we want to have a weekly rosary that's available for the members of the community. So there's lots of different ways that they will come up with to take what they've learned and put it into practice. And that's always really exciting to hear how those ideas come to fruition. I'm looking forward to, I was hearing from one of our high schools that was at the conference last year, and they're like, we did this whole Dominican Day thing, and they wanted to share what they've been doing, what they did to make that day a success. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing the write up of what that looked like and to seeing pictures. That's also very
hmm
important. I think the
Sure.
other thing that's really sustaining for me in this ministry is that this is a ministry for the whole Dominican family. So this is not confined to my own congregation, but is really an opportunity for me to have gotten to know so many sisters from all of these other congregations and to get to know a lot of the friars as well. So you were mentioning Sister Elise and how she was involved in these early high school preaching conferences. And I know I've gotten to know Sister Marceline Koch, for instance, um, from the from my interactions with her at the high school preaching conference.
hmm
And I mean, so many other sisters from all these different communities. You mentioned the Encuentro in October. And for me, one of the amazing things was I kept on turning around and seeing all these sisters I knew from other congregations. And I'm like hanging out with this group of Spark Hill Dominican sisters that I knew from the college conference and when I had gotten to see them the May before. So it's been a real privilege to me that I've gotten to know the broader family through this and also to really know the support of Dominican congregations in this particular ministry. So, and I mean that financially, of course. I'm very grateful to all of the congregations that donate to make this ministry possible. but also by doing presentations at our conferences, and through the support that the sisters have given me over the years and their prayers, it really makes a huge difference in the success of these conferences.
You know, as you're speaking, I'm reminding of something that for me has been a through line in my own 40 plus years as a Dominican sister. That's this concept of Dominican family and what I like to call Dominic's original vision for the order. I think we're closer today to living that than ever before. His original vision for the order was that the order would be made up of women and men, consecrated and lay, who work together all for the sake of the preaching of the gospel. And I like to tell the story about Sister Barbara Beaumont is one of the order's premier historians, and she has a story in one of her books where she documents this, I guess you'd call it a deed or a will, maybe is a better word, from one of the lay women who was associated with the sisters in Pruya in France, which was, by the way, the first foundation of Dominicans in the entire world, was the women. And this will says, Ermengarde and her man will and bequeath to the holy preaching at Pruya all of their belongings. That blew my mind, and it still blows my mind. And for me, it's the seed of what we're trying to do today. Not that we're asking all of the Dominicans to turn over all their wealth to us, but that they called the nuns at the monastery in Pruy the holy preaching, first of all, right? And then they threw their lot in with these women. And we know from historical records that the monastery at Pruya was surrounded by farm fields, and that those people that raised the food around the monastery provided food not only for the sisters, but for the friars who were traveling throughout France, who needed a place to stop and rest and renew their provisions. And that place was Pruya, you know. And I think we can, for me, that's very enlivening. It's an enlivening story. You know, how do we do that together today? So we've already talked about the high schools, the colleges, and the preaching conferences. We've talked about Dominican Veritas Ministries. But we also have lay associates, or lay Dominicans, the nuns of the order, and we have a congregation very close to us in Girard, and we're close both geographically and by heart. And then there's also the high school or the Dominican Associate programs. And just this past year, we hosted at our house the meeting of the directors of all the Dominican Associate programs throughout the United States. And I had to be there for tech reasons, but I have to tell you, I left that meeting on fire, paying attention to the creativity and the energy that these directors of the Dominican Associate programs were sharing with one another, and their plans for the future. So there are so many ways that people can get engaged with the order, that when we speak about the call to the holy preaching, there's not a single person on the planet who wouldn't be eligible to participate in some way. Everything from the laity of the order and the associate programs to consecrated life as a priest, brother, sister, or contemplative nun. So there's no excuse for anyone. We're all committed to the same mission of preaching the truth of God's love for humanity. And there's no excuse for anyone not to be Dominican. Catherine, I guess that's where I'm going.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So when we speak about call, we want to encourage young men and women to choose the path of consecrated life, but that is not the only way to choose to be a Dominican. And so I think maybe we'll end with this question to you. How would you encourage a young person who's seeking their path in life to think about Dominican life?
I think I would start by asking them the question of, like, what are the hopes of your heart. So, what are those things that are really deeply important to you? And to start with that as a guiding foundation for where you want to move forward. Um, if you are between the ages of 18 and 35, maybe the Dominican Young Adults program is a good place to start, um, because it gives you an opportunity to explore the four pillars of Dominican life more deeply, because it gives you an opportunity to really experience Dominican community and to get to know the family more generally. And I think that sense of getting your feet wet is a really good place to start if you're really unsure of where to go.
Mhm.
I think another thing to remember is that there's always, as you alluded to in your um, description of the family, there's always a place in the Dominican family that can meet you where you are. So if you are, for instance, already married with 4 kids, like, then maybe being a Dominican associate is a really good place for you and a really good opportunity to collaborate with the mission of Dominican Sisters. And maybe you are looking for the long tradition that we have had with the I'm trying to make sure I get this right. I'm not going to get it right, but the different groups of Dominican lay people that we have in this country,
Mhm.
which has a really long history in the order. I mean, St. Katherine of Siena, we always talk about her as being a sister, but she was actually a member of one of these groups of lay
A
Dominicans.
lay group, yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. And so there's a really wonderful history that we've had going back hundreds of years of how of a providing ways for people to be part of the mission of the order. And I think that the final thing I would say is the question of, like, how can we incorporate preaching into our daily lives? And as a vowed member of a religious congregation, this is still a question I wrestle with, of how that question of, like, how can I really be authentic to the preaching call that I have been given by God? And asking myself the question of, is there a way that I am being called to preach that I have not yet explored? And asking myself, is there a way, what is it that I need to be able to do in order to explore that method? So, whether that's, I mean, it could go from everything from, like, having a blog of reflections, or a Substack letter, I guess, is like the new way to do it. It could be giving a talk in your parish. It could be, how are you living out the mission of preaching truth in your familial relationships? Sometimes that's the hardest one of all.
Hmm.
So I think there's always ways that we can incorporate that preaching mission into our lives, um, and know that if you feel called to explore that, I think all of us are called to explore that more deeply. It's not something that we can just sit back and say, oh, we're done. It's something we have to keep on coming back to and exploring.
Right. We say around here, we're not retired until we can no longer put our feet on the floor and move.
Oh, even that.
You know, uh, we as long as we can sit up on the edge of the bed in the morning, we have a preaching mission. God calls all of us to that, and we remind ourselves of that frequently. Um, the witness of our community life is often a preaching. So if you find yourself attracted to any of these ways that Sister Katherine and I have spoken, about what it means to be a Dominican, find a Dominican come running. We're all here. I'll put in the show notes some links to some really helpful Dominican resources, and one of them will be the website for Dominican Sisters International. well, that will be there, but also the Dominican Sisters Conference USA, because there people will find links to the websites of all of the congregations who are welcoming vocations to religious life. And you can find their other resources. I think maybe the best one. I was cheering when I learned this. Maybe you haven't heard it yet, but the Dominican Charism Initiative course units are now available free with no paywall, all available on the Dominican Sisters Conference website. So all of those resources are there. But the best thing to do, if you have any interest in being a Dominican, is to find a Dominican that you know and say, how can I join you? In whatever way that looks for you. Right, Katherine?
Yeah, we're very friendly for the most part.
At least after coffee in the morning for most of us. Yeah, there we go. Anything else you want to say? Otherwise, I'm going to close us out and we'll get you on the way to your busy day.
Yeah, thank you for having me on here. I'm so glad that I could share a little bit about what it means to what it is that I do with my young adults and my youth. I know that they are really where I feel God is putting so many seeds of the future. And it's really always a privilege to watch them grow and to be part of that formation and that
Mm.
nurturing. So I'm really grateful to share a little bit about what we do. And I'm just really grateful for all the support that I've had in this particular ministry.
Wonderful. So thank you very much, Sister Katherine Frazier, who is Executive Director of the Dominican Youth Movement, USA. I think what you've shared today is broadening and encouraging of Dominican vocation in whatever form that takes for so many people. Like I said before, there'll be resources in the show notes that people can find to learn more. So on behalf of the Dominican Sisters of Springfield, thank you. And on behalf of the Flowcast team, which is myself and Brandon Durham, Jean Ann Miller, thanks for listening. Until next month, we hope you have a beautiful and blessed day. By the time we're together again, Lent will have started. So blessings on the coming Lent, and we'll hope to see our listeners and Katherine again sometime. Take care.
Thank you.